and it involves issues of justice and livelihoods and so on. Mining is also in an industry that involves some sort of lumpiness, and it's a term that I've come across as I understood a little bit more about mining finances, is that there are highs and lows of demand. And this translates into fiscal and investment regimes that are peculiar to the mining industry. They're different from other regimes, and they recognize that the exploration costs, they recognize that there's unpredictability in commodity prices. Also, if we look globally, mining is increasingly mechanized. And it's something that we can't avoid in South Africa, looking at why that is the case and what that means for the competitiveness of our own sector. Also, the way that companies in the mining sector try to smooth the flow of revenue is through market share, market dominance, and diversification, so that when one commodity, one commodity's fortunes balances out another's, and also flexibility, and we see that flexibility translated in the platinum sector to the consequences for labor, contract workers. The last point I want to make about the nature of the mining industry is thinking through the importance of the scale of mining projects to secure investments in infrastructure. Large-scale mining projects which have long lives provide the opportunity for scaling and for discussion around infrastructure that serves the public good as well as the sector. If we look at the MPDRA, we had mineral rights transferred to the state, we had opening up the sector to new entrants, we've had time-limited mining rights. We've essentially had South Africa opened up to mining broadly, to mining and mining exploration broadly, and we've encouraged smaller scale mining. And that all has consequences for how one is able to address the externalities of mining and the extent to which one can leverage mining investments for development. In terms of the way that our policy has considered the social dimensions of mining. Okay, that's formalized in the Mining Charter, and I'm going to leave off here with a statement about the Mining Charter in and of itself. One of the difficulties that emerged from the Mining Charter is that it has encouraged very small projects. Projects that are almost minuscule compared to the size of interventions and shifts that we're needing to bring about significant change in people's lives. And there are obvious opportunities to look at how one could direct the resources that are available through the provisions of the Mining Charter to much larger scale interventions. I'm going to leave it there because I think that what I've done is hopefully just sketched out some of what I see as the inherent and intrinsic issues that we're needing to face when we think about whether we can go forward from Marikana with business as usual. I would suggest not, but I think I'd be really interested to see where the discussion goes. Thank you.
Thanks, May. I want to take us back to Cesar's comment yesterday. He found it fascinating that in South Africa we always start from the premise of yes to mining and how can we get a benefit and get a share out of mining versus Latin American struggles around no to mining, and he very rarely hears the no to mining. So we're always starting off with assumptions around the benefits of mining. Thank you to the panel. I know you threw out a question to Peter in particular around nationalization, and I'll give Peter time to speak to that later, but I want to open it up to the many hands that I see. So I think we'll take a round of 6 questions now and then get people to respond. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at the back. Do we have mics? Do we have ushers?
This one here.
Okay, so Devin, you can kick us off.
Thanks, Nikki. May, I was very pleasantly surprised by your contribution. We both come out of the NUM, we both skeptical about mining, which is very interesting. I think when I heard Peter, when I heard your presentation, you talked about mining and development and the need for jobs, etc. I thought, oh, you're still trapped in this old paradigm, what I call the 20th century development paradigm. And I know it's very difficult for us to move out of it because the minerals energy complexes seep into all of us. We feel trapped by it. But your whole notion of living well, which is something that Evo Morales in Bolivia talks about, a different conceptualization of development, living well as opposed to the growth imperative and the consumption production treadmills. It's something we've really got to grab with both hands, because the nature of capitalism today is that it cannot create these jobs. Full employment is no longer on the agenda. Decent work is no longer on the agenda for all people. It's only for a small, tiny, gated community, let's say, broadening the concept of a gated community. What I want to find out, though, from you, May, when you ended off, I was not sure what you was getting at. When you talked about the mining charter versus encouraging small projects and the need for larger projects. And I was wondering whether you were now starting to contradict yourself. And I hope not.
Okay, thanks. Okay, one comrade, 1 minute.
Thanks for my chair. My name is Warren McGregor. I'm a student here. And as a student, I would like to maybe take this to an abstract level, I guess, and take up the discussion on nationalization. I think, on one hand, I think the arguments for nationalization are, in fact, as far as I'm concerned, or at least I would argue, are ideological arguments, fundamentally based on the assumption that different class forces in society can control the state. I was struck yesterday by a statement made in one of the presentations that the socialist response would be a call for nationalization. I would contend that nationalization is a socialist response, and an alternative socialist argument actually argues against nationalization, based fundamentally on a different analysis of the state, that actually the state is a centralizing authority that is in and of itself class-based. And so that's when we go to policy choices made by the state in its particular issues, such as wages, etc., etc. But then also societal structure determined by class struggle, yes, but that societal structure is also determined by, and class struggle is determined by, the ideas that are dominant in this working class struggle. So that mine is particularly a critique of the seemingly automatic perception that nationalization is somehow fundamentally progressive, to then raise the term that has been raised by many others before, the term socialization, and to suggest that any fundamental social transformation will be determined by how workers struggle and respond, but then also the ideas that inform their struggles and inform the way that they organize.
Thank you. My contribution is not a comment on what was said, which I found wonderfully stimulating in the workshop. Mine is to sort of pick up what seems to be something that's missing. It may be missing because it's taken for granted. And it came up in the last session by one of the question. And that, for me, is that Marikana is a global phenomenon. All countries in the south are having their Marikanas. Brazil, Argentina, Portugal, Greece, Tunisia, Egypt, Turkey, Georgia, parts of India, China. And the reason why, of course, they take different forms, obviously. That's what makes comparative analysis interesting. But they share four common features. The first is the growing inequality and marginalization that's taking place. People talking about the growing precarization and the growth of precariat. But also the limits of institutionalization. What you see in these countries are new forms of organization emerging, whether that self-activity of workers, sometimes expressing themselves in violent forms. And they're also coming up with alternatives, but with no clear alternative developmental path. Now, I just thought that maybe we, in thinking beyond, I suppose, this particular workshop, is to think of it in the context of a globalization of these issues and how people are responding in interestingly similar but also different ways across the globe. Thank you.
Right in front here.
I think that a point that we not realize.
Speak up.
Just stand up.
Okay, a point that we not, well, an aspect that we're not recognizing possibly is that since 2002, mining is a lease, and therefore you can do anything on a lease, right? If you make it too onerous, you're not going to get much investment, but you can put whatever you want. So if we turn it around and say, well, why would we want to nationalize? Okay, we want a greater share of the surplus. The other, we want to control supply demand to get stability. We want decent work. We want greater local content and greater value addition. Well, all of those can be built into the lease. The problem is will. All of these have been put forward constantly. In fact, we tried to put them in the bill in 2002, but there were other agendas at the time. And I don't see going nationalization, you're going to have any more will. If we don't have the will just to put in the lease, your local content will be X. You will pay a resource rent tax above a normal rate of return of 50% that will go into all of these skilling and other things. You will go downstream. Or the easy one on platinum that we recommend is to take back just the right to market like with gold, and then have a single channel export mechanism, and therefore you could control supply demand. But none of these gets traction. So yeah, you can go for nationalization. Your chance of getting traction is even less. The problem is the will to do it. It is that the polity as it is, the settlements that are made between the various power structures in South Africa are such that the voice of international capital, and I was about to say and local capital, but I'm not quite sure. What is Anglo? Is it local, international, or both? And I think that's the critical issue. We've got, this is not like Eskom, where you're not dealing with the resource. That's a manufacturing, you'd have to nationalize it, and Sims recommends renationalization. But for minerals, you've got a lease you can put anything you like on. Like when you lease a car. You're the only driver, and if you break that lease, they take the car back. The other issue to make is, to what extent can this be a driver of equitable growth and development? The conclusion that I have is, for the future, yes, but to deal with what's really in front of us is the backlog. The graph that was shown is that backlog of unemployment. So even if we get into all the upstream and we get the kind of multipliers of the Nordics, and that would be, I guess, about 2 million jobs, all in all, including all the multipliers, etc., etc. These are going to be like our NUMSA auto jobs. They're all matric plus. What do we then? We have a whole generation that we've got to have another plan for. So although I think there are ways for the future, they all require a massive skilling of our workforce in order to compete globally. Thanks.
We had a question on that side. It was Bonnie, and next to you, Bonnie, as well. And then I'm going to give the panel a chance to respond. Bonnie, and next to Bonnie as well.
Thanks very much. I'm going to stand up. Okay. All right, I'm Bonnie. Can I respond to, and I'll do it briefly, Nikki, can I respond to your point about the question of inquiry and the lawyering around it? And I think that was brought up, Peter, in your, you mentioned that there was this disjuncture between the lawyers and unity, and I think that there's been an interesting romanticization of the power of law, the power of lawyers. And it's a manner of intervening. And in many ways, the Marikana Commission of Inquiry, in my view, and I'm not allowed to say this, but I'll say it, has been hijacked by the legal process. Had we actually done what that commission was supposed to set up to do, which was to have meaningful engagement, to be a forum for the people, we would be sitting with a very different set of facts today. The other point I'd like to raise is I'm really impressed with the diversity of discussions that I understand took place yesterday and today. And there's one concern or consideration that I think needs to be reiterated as well, and that is, to a certain extent, we're tap dancing around one major issue. And that is, in 200 years, nothing's changed. Since slavery, the abolition of slavery, nothing has changed in the extraction industry, other than perhaps the extent of the profit. And unless we start reconfiguring the participation and what that participation in the mining industry looks like, these suggestions, I think, are not going to achieve the objective. So, for example, if you think that in order to get something of value out of the ground, you need 5 players. Every single one of these players is essential. You need government, because they're the custodians. You need investors who've got the money. You need the actual mining management companies, because they have the know-how and the infrastructure. You need the labourers, because without the labourers, there is not, even though nationalisation is on the rise, you're always going to need labourers. And finally, most importantly, you need a community. The mine-affected community is completely discounted as a contributor to the extraction industry. Not by those of us in this room, but certainly by those who quantify the value. The monetary value of these contributions is out the window. So whether it's nationalisation, whether it's capitalism, whether it's socialism, that those 5 players provide equal input, and there's a devastating, unacceptable reality that they don't get equal output from their participation.
Thank you. What a coincidence. She is born and I'm who is born. I'm an engaged using student here at the VITS. My question, I think, is going to be centered on Meg, and it's very diverse. I'm just basing on the benefits of what I call the principle of influence, which is sometimes it becomes a master of a gap created. Which gap now, what I'm talking about is if we look at the state and effects of Marikana, it seems the state is a bit lukewarm about the whole issue. But now there is somebody who is taking advantage of this gap, and there are effects around in that. And since yesterday to this day, nobody has spoken about it. And I'm talking about Malema. This is a serious issue, whereby he has taken this gap and is now talking about land issue, and the mines, this is land. We are talking of the communities, whereby these communities, he is even talking about mobilizing them to own back the land, even the mines. And these are effects which are going to have serious implications. So I don't know, have you ever thought about it? Is there anyone thinking around that, studying anything around that, and what's the position? Or it's of no value currently until it becomes valuable? Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to give people a chance to respond. Carl, Peter, May, and we can see how we're doing with time.
And the only comment I want to make is on the last contribution by Wisdom about Malema and the economic freedom fighters. I mean, I think that one of the important things about that Malema represents is a kind of a voice that has been excluded from official discourse around policy. And that was what I think the powers within the ANC found irritating, and no doubt find even more irritating now. That he's got a free rein to say things that are not said. Of course, there's a kind of a radical populism about his initiative, and it's not clear what the progressive or reactionary content of it is. But I think it's very important what he's placing on the agenda, including questions around land and nationalisation.
Yeah, I agree with Bonnie. I think she makes a very important point. And of course, when I'm criticising lawyers, it really means Bonnie and a few other people accept it. Because my concern here is the amount they get paid. 30,000 rand a day. You know, I mean, this seems to me ridiculous. And I don't see how one can live well when we know that these people are paid so much. I don't see how one can live well when we know that mine bosses are paid 250 times as much as ordinary workers. So I agree with living well, but living well also means we have to think about how society is ordered at the level of production. And who controls production? And my basic argument is that if production is left in the hands of a tiny number of people, they will run society in a particular kind of way. So that's the issue that we have to address. It's not about leases, I don't think. It's about controlling the mines as such and making sure that they are run in the interests of people. If they can just go back to think about 1994, then a lot of the iron ore production was government owned. It got privatised through Kumba to Anglo-American. Now Kumba is the company, you'll have to correct me here, but I think it's got the second highest rate of return on capital of any company in South Africa over a period of 10 years. Enormous profits being made at Kumba.
Which company is high?
Coronation. And they're doing so well that they pay their workers very well. And in fact, Frans Belleni said to me once, Peter, we've got a problem. We've got a place where workers are getting paid too much. And he was referring to Kumba. Now, if Kumba was still owned by the government, all of those profits that are presently going to Anglo-American and these people in London and elsewhere would be resources that could be used for people in all sorts of ways, in whatever ways one determines in relation to development. It may be rural development, but certainly in ways in which people can begin to live well. One of the things I don't understand is when we talk about cutting jobs, and I'm not in favour of cutting jobs, but if they're going to be cut, or if there's going to be a reduction in the number of hours being worked, why does this necessarily mean that you sack 10, 15,000 workers? Why not divide up the work in a more equitable way? Rather than having miners working, as often they do, for 12 hours a day, why not have them working for 6 hours a day? So that there's less stress, less safety problems, and so on. It seems to be a much better way of handling things. But again, it comes back to the question of ownership and control. Now, I don't want to pretend that nationalisation, and I think really I'm talking about socialisation to respond to the student there, but socialisation when it comes to very big enterprises like major mines, Anglo-Plat and so on, it must involve some degree of state intervention. That's really what I'm talking about when I talk about nationalisation. It's really about the state. I don't think this is a panacea for one moment. You know, still, if you're going to sell gold, it's going to be on a world market where the nation state doesn't control the price. And one of the problems that existed in Zambia, came out in the presentation we had from Mans Lama, is that you can control the industry, the copper industry, but when the copper price slumps, there's not much you can do about it. And it does affect the number of workers employed, and it affects the country as a whole. What nationalisation does is to give you a bit more purchase, a bit more control over what happens to surpluses and so on. So that's really why I'm putting forward the argument.
Thank you. I think let's just start with the question around mining itself, the question that was posed by Devon. I don't believe that it's possible to make a complete break from mining right now. And I think that what we're going to have to look at, if we are serious about an alternative development path, is to start thinking about transitions where we decrease the intensity of mining, and we think about what mining is essential for. And there is emerging discussion, as I'm sure you're well aware of, about what could constitute a green economy. And so for me the questions are about those transitions. And in the meantime, we have to address the issues of people who are unemployed, marginalised and desperate. And some of those transitional arrangements that need to be made, issues around how one could put the monies and the efforts that go into mining charter projects and leverage it in a far more meaningful way, go towards that sentiment. And then I'm going to go to the issues around development as a whole. I think that we don't have any answers. We don't have consensus about what our development path is. We have Carl right here, who has served on the National Planning Commission, which ostensibly set out the development path for the country, but we don't have consensus on that. And I suppose for me, until we do, unless we do, we are going to find ourselves circling around these issues over and over again. In some sense, some of the things that we're needing to talk about is what's it going to take until we get to the point where people are living well. What are the timelines?